Hello and welcome, Mark, to our Christmas special. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great. Well, we've just worked out at the beginning of the call that Mark's only, I'd say, maybe 30 minutes away from me.
Yeah.
So we've got like quite a big US audience, so it's good to speak to someone local.
So what you're doing is a sort of Northern British Christmas special. That's how it's going to end up working out. uh,
I guess to begin with, we can keep it quite broad and sort of just ask you, sort of take it wherever you want to go, but ask you, what are the true origins of Christmas? Like, where did Christmas actually come from?
wow. Okay. Doesn't matter which direction you go in. What you're going to find is that it's, believe it or not, astrological based. It's to do with calendars. There's no escaping that. There was a whole cluster of different festivals that clustered around what we celebrate as midwinter solstice. But of course, the midwinter solstice, the timing of that is down to what's going on in the heavens. So I suppose astronomy, maybe astrology, it depends how far back you go. You can have a solstice any time between the 20th and the 23rd of December. It moves, it depends on the year. It can sort of drift. I believe this year I think I'm right in saying it's in the early hours of the 22nd. And it's the point where basically the night time, the darkness becomes the longest and the daylight becomes the shortest. So, what tended to happen, because obviously in prehistoric times and what have you, when they had stone circles and all that, the idea that you could have a day that was dramatically shorter than any of the others, that quite, impressed them. And then it sort of moves from that into the idea that, well, every day after that is getting lighter. So in one sense, you're witnessing the death of the year, and then in another sense, you're witnessing the birth of the new year. So there were dozens of festivals then that clustered around that idea, that concept. Um, so it can be quite broad. There's a number of dates. Do you want me to float into some examples?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, all right, right. I'll drift into some example. One of the classic ones is the Jewish festival, Hanukkah, which sort of starts before what most of us would regard as the official Christmas, and it runs for 8 days. And that's really the origins of where we get candles from, because they light a candle every day for 7 days, which are on the branches either side, and then the centre candle, the eighth one, is lit on the last day. So this year, actually, it's gone early. They've gone quite early, so their Hanukkah's sort of done and dusted about a week before we get anywhere near Christmas. And I think it just this year it just comes up and touches on solstice, which is obviously midwinter. Um, that midwinter solstice, that is where we get a lot of the pagan traditions that you find clustered around Christmas. I'm going very broad with this. People who are involved in Wicca and witchcraft, etc., druids, they all tend to cluster around the idea of this midwinter solstice, which this year is at Stonehenge. So they'll all be turning up on the 21st. They'll all be gathering at Stonehenge and watching the midwinter sunrise on the 22nd. By which time, of course, astronomically speaking, we'll already be into the start of the new year. Um, Moving a little bit further on from that, I mean, you've got the idea of the sort of 23rd, 24th, 25th. That is principally Roman. They had Saturnalia, which was their festival, which, funnily enough, goes earlier. I'm trying to remember when the date was for Saturnalia. Yeah, it's earlier. It's usually it's over by the 23rd. So it could run any time sort of between the 17th and the 25th of December was Saturnalia, and usually it was over by the 23rd. But the actual 25th, which is interesting, is Sol Invictus. It's the reborn sun, which I very strongly suspect has connections to Emperor Constantine the Great, who was around in the early fourth century, just after sort of 300 AD onwards, and he took Christianity, if you like, and Romanized it, combined it with the Roman festivals, the Roman calendar. So I mean, he was a lifelong worshipper of Sol Invictus. It's funny because everyone says, "Oh yeah, Christian emperor of Rome." It was his wife actually that was a Christian, because he only converted on his deathbed. So he's kind of edging his bet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He's kind of, I might get in, but only just. So he sort of brought a lot of the solar things and the Roman festivals. He brought a lot of those in. Um, then you've actually, in some traditions, you're floating sort of towards New Year, and New Year is open to debate. It depends on what calendar you follow as to as when the new year comes in. But then that is the next thing, if you like, that then joins on, it bolts on, because we have sort of, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day. By this point, you're into the, well into the 20s. And of course, then you've got New Year's Eve on the 30th and then New Year's Day on the 31st. But if you look at the Celtic calendar, the Celts were keeping their New Year as late as the 16th of January. So it's kind of a bit of a movable feast. It tends to bounce around a bit. So that's really the broadest, it's probably the best known origins of Christmas, I would say.
Yeah. And so how much of the just going down the route of the sort of pagan um traditions, how big of an influence do they have on the Christmas which we see today?
Um, well, it's interesting. What we're looking at now, I mean, I started off by saying, Hanukkah. Well, the whole Jewish thing, you're drifting back into the late BC period. So you're kind of looking at what, when the Hebrews gradually developed into what we now know as the Jews, the Jewish nation. So you're either side of, year one, if you like, you're going all the way back to that period. And then everything that's happened since then, every sort of race, every nation, every faith, has added its own flavor, if you like. So I suppose it depends. It depends on your view of what you would call pagan, because, of course, Jesus is born, so he's born in like 6.5 BC, because we know that from Chinese records of a comet that was around at that point. So, and also there's about a 7-year discrepancy in the Julian calendar because it was miscalculated. So that's about right. But then he's born in summer, because it says, in the famous story about shepherds. Well, the shepherds are a summer phenomena in the Middle East. They tend to come sort of any time from March, April, right through to sort of September. So in that sense, the story comes from there, but that's not the true origin. The origins of the dates, very much like you say, lie with other traditions. Um, and all the stuff they bolted on. I mean, good grief. I don't really know where to get started with that. I suppose you could take a bit of a if you look at the whole Christian thing, you don't find anything really. This is going to blow everyone's mind. There's nothing really to do with Christmas in the Bible. I know that sounds bonkers, but your kind of little wooden stable with your snow, and your three wise men and all that sort of stuff. That's not biblical. I mean, the stable's a cave. You don't tend to get snow in the Middle East, and especially not in the warmer climates. The three wise men. It doesn't say three. They actually got names in medieval period. There could have been dozens of them. And if you actually look at how magi function, and you have a look at the Persian mystics and what have you, you very often discover that some of them are ladies. So the idea of it being men is a very traditional sort of medieval thing. Um, and the whole birth story is a bit bizarre as well. I would strongly encourage people to go and have a look at some of the non-biblical gospels. Go and have a look at things like the Gospel of Mary and what have you, because the birth story is very, very different, even in that. And funnily enough, the whole idea of a virgin birth, and we sing about that in hymns and all this and the other. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna be quite radical and say, yeah. I mean, people go, well, she can't possibly be a virgin. She gave birth to Jesus. Well, whoa, hang on, back up a bit. Jesus is an immaculate conception. So if you can get, a female who is essentially a hermaphrodite to produce a child from nowhere, sealing her back up afterwards isn't going to be a problem. It's a belief thing. It's a belief statement. So go and have a look at some of the Gnostic Gospels. They're fascinating. The extra detail that gets put in. So the whole concept, the whole idea of what we view as baby Jesus in a manger in this little wooden thing, stuck out on the street corner somewhere, surrounded by Three Wise Men and that. It's not, it's not quite the same. I would encourage folks to go and check that out. There's no link at all really between churchianity, which is what we've got now, and first century, New Testament Christianity. There's a void. There's a huge void between the two. And again, what would you regard Jesus as? I can throw a bit of trivia in here. They did a recent test, and apparently there are some people still alive today. They did a test on the Turin shroud and came up with some DNA, and it turns out that the DNA they got for the blood samples off the shroud would put Jesus's family quite firmly as being sort of one of the offshoots, if you like, in that area of not non-standard religion. So it's very difficult to actually pin it all down and say, yeah, absolutely certain, it's all Christian, don't you know? Well, that didn't exist. That wasn't there. That's a bolt on. Okay, well, we could jump a bit further forward from that. Do you want me to sort of go into some of the add-ons, some of the bits apart from the manger?
Yeah,
you,
maybe talk about how the Christmas tree came
Oh yeah,
about.
I've got two of those behind me, haven't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting one because everybody tends to say in this country, and they're right to say it, that it was popularised. The Christmas tree came into being in the days of Queen Victoria. I mean, the Victorians were enormously big into Christmas trees. Absolutely loved it. But it all actually, that side of it goes back to an engraving of Victoria and Albert and the children keeping Christmas. The engraving was printed in 1848. So everybody sort of points at that engraving and goes, that's it, that's what it. But no, because there was a Queen Charlotte who was alive before that. She was the wife of George III. I think she was something like 1761. I think she became queen when she married George, and she died in 1818, and she brought a Christmas tree over. So it was nothing new, sort of 50, 60, 70, 80 years before there were Christmas trees, in Balmoral and, in Buckingham Palace and all that. They had trees then. But the tree itself, the origins of that, I believe, is Viking. I think it's a Viking Norse tradition. In their temples, if you like, in the places that they worshipped, they would bring evergreen into the temples. So that's your origins of this idea of never dying. Something that could live through a really harsh winter and remain green. It's that wish for the return of spring. Which then spills out. I mean, yes, it's a Germanic thing. It's kind of an Anglo-Scandinavian thing to have a Christmas tree, but then it spills out as well into things like, okay, mistletoe doesn't die. And that's got Druidic origins because it's very special in the Druidic tradition. Holly doesn't die, so we bring that in because that, again, that's an evergreen. So that is all going back to this idea that they decorated temples with things that just didn't die, didn't pass away. And I'm not quite sure how it's become so popular. And it's, it's from that one engraving in 1848 now, there's a tree everywhere. Every town square, every house, everybody's got these trees that they bring in. I like the idea of having a tree with a ball of roots that you can plant out, one that actually, survives beyond Christmas. I mean, the ones I've got are fake, so I just wheel them out every year. It's so nothing dies, as it were. It's ironic, actually, the number of Christmas trees that get wiped out, every Christmas, and yet they're supposed to represent life. It's some strange contradiction.
What about decorating the Christmas tree? Is that something that the Vikings used to do, or is that something that came along later?
Well, Christmas decorations are interesting because the engraving of 1848 that kind of fired it all up, it just shows a few Christmas baubles. But it's known, for example, going back, I mean, I'm jumping around a bit here, go all the way back to the Roman festivals, so 100, 200, 300, 400 AD, possibly tipping into early Saxon times. They decorated loads of things over the Christmas periods, doorways, windows, buildings. The Romans clearly had glass as well. Glass was extraordinarily special. And the Vikings had no idea how glass was made. So, one tiny little glass bead was equal to a silver coin to the Vikings because they had no concept of where this magical stuff came from. So when you start pushing all of that together, by the time you're into sort of late Saxon, early Viking times, decorating using valuable objects becomes the next step. So, excuse me. So that's not just the baubles, it's not just the glass, it's other things. So the exchanging of gifts goes back to the Roman times. They did that in the run up to Christmas. They did it in their Saturnalia. They actually gave that the giving of gifts. But gifts can also be hung on a tree as decorations. Your baubles, your glass. I suppose that's Roman, but I'm more inclined to think the Vikings did that. Shiny things, coins, anything that's valuable, that would end up on a Christmas tree. I think tinsel's much later. Tinsel is very much a sort of, I think that came in after the First World War. I think if you look at what was happening during the wars, I think people just wanted things to be bright, and shiny. So, I can remember my mum and dad back in the my mum and dad were born in the 1930s. They had stuff left over. I was born in the 60s. So when they got their trunk of Christmas stuff out, it was full of tinsel and ornaments and things you stuck on the tree. But they went back to the 1950s, the 1940s. My mum, it was interesting. My mum kept everything. She never threw anything away. And she still had a little glass bird with a clip on it that you clipped on the Christmas tree that was her great grandma's bird. So you're going back to the 1890s, you're going back to the 1880s, so clearly it was a massive tradition towards the end of the Victorian era. It was really popular by the 1870s, 1880s to decorate the tree. As for the fairy stuck on top, well, I know a joke about that actually, because the fairy came in at the very end and had a Christmas tree left over and said to Santa, "What can I do with this?" And she's been stuck up there ever since. I hope you don't get banned for me saying that. That's a terrible joke, but there you go.
That's a good one.
No, I think the fairies, the angels, isn't it? The angels that appeared around the nativity. That's the fairy. But that depends which gospel you read, and it depends in your belief system. The early angels were believed to be no different from us, apart from the fact they don't reproduce. So you don't have a male or a female angel. They have no particular gender. So there you go. They're supposed to look very much like us. Go on, having completely ruined the entire podcast with my joke. Go on, fire another question.
No, you brought light to it, definitely.
Very illuminating. Yeah, that's another thing. Lights. I never mentioned the lights. That's got to be to do with brightness again. And what's interesting is, of course, they wouldn't have had lights in the Victorian era because electricity wasn't that popular. So they are very much a sort of post First World War invention. Fairy lights. Anyway, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, but well, what you're saying about add-ons is you can start. Now we're starting to put together that each sort of generation that's been out there have put small little add-ons. Some of them must have stuck, and that's what we're living with today. Some of them must have sort of just
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there's even traditions coming up around now, like this elf on a shelf thing.
Oh yeah,
That was never a thing
absolutely.
when I was younger, but now all the kids love it. Elf on a shelf on the build up to Christmas, like the Advent.
Well, my ex-missus had no sense of humour whatsoever, and in the 1980s, as a Christmas decoration, I stuck a figure of Mr. Blobby on the Christmas tree, and then she just went nuts. But why not? You put whatever. I guess that is a really important point, because at the end of the day, if the tree is the wish for the future, if it's really viewed as the Vikings saying, we're going to resurrect, we're into another year, we've made it this far, then what you put on the tree actually would be quite important. If you follow a magical tradition, it is truly a wish for the future, isn't it? So, yeah, by all means, modernize. I think we should modernize and move forward.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What I think I've noticed a lot this Christmas is a lot of people are putting stars, and for a couple of Christmases, they're putting stars on top of the tree instead of angels now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, I mean, from my point of view, actually, sort of in my general, sort of eclectic belief system, the star is the most important part of it, because right at the very beginning of the whole true biblical story is the star, and it's the star that the Chinese made a record of this comet occurrence that they've got in their records that enables us to date it. So as an archaeologist, I'm chuffed to bits with that. We can pin it down somewhere in the summer of sort of 6.5 BC. That's brilliant, between 6 and 7 BC. That's fab. So by all means, yeah, pop the star up there. I think that's a far better symbol.
Yeah, much
Yeah.
more credible.
Yeah.
So just flicking back at a few steps back, you talked about the Roman Empire with the people that brought gift giving into Christmas.
Yeah.
I read somewhere, and I don't know how true or how far away this might be, but that the putting gifts under the Christmas tree were to represent I don't know what they're called, the mushrooms that are red and white. They were to represent them mushrooms because when them below them trees in the wild, that's where their mushrooms grow. So it was a representation of them mushrooms, but I don't quite know the connection. If you have any insight on that.
I've always understood that to be an extension of children's books, which came out in the second half of the Victorian era, so 1850 through to 1900. Don't ask me how this happened, but somehow we picked up elves and pixies and fairies and the magic of fairy rings. So I think it's a bit like, how on earth did we get stuck with a rabbit that lays eggs at Easter? I think it's one of those, it's one of those weird things that somehow through the wonder of fairies kind of got adopted in. My understanding of the gifts is obviously that it's something that's exchanged between people during Saturnalia, which is the festival. But also the twist I understood was that the idea that you got no gifts, or the areas that we come from up here, up north in the UK, if you were bad, you got a bag of cinders. You got whatever was left over in the fire grate the night before in a bag, and you got that under the tree, and that was it. You got nothing else if you were bad. Which is interesting because that's not necessarily unique, because the extreme version of that, of course, is in Germanic lands. You've got Krampus. You've got this demonic horned, assistant that for all the world looks like a medieval version of the devil. And it follows St. Nicholas around, it follows Santa Claus around. And if you've been good, fantastic. You get your gifts from St. Nicholas, and he's nice and he's kind, and you get the blessing. And then, but if you're not, Krampus will whip you with, sticks and beat you. And if you've been particularly bad, throw you in his basket and take you off to hell. That is very clearly, from continental medieval folklore. It's another add-on from the medieval church, because, of course, the concept of hell, you can't have a biblical hell because there hasn't been a judgment yet. So it exists after the judgment, but somehow they managed to move the goalposts in the medieval times, and they came up with this wonderful place called hell, full of these nasty looking creatures, of which Krampus is one of them. So you can kind of see where that's coming from. That's your origins of the whole Krampus thing. But like I say, under the tree, all I can remember is pine needles. Oh, they were terrible. We always used to have real Christmas trees as a kid. This socking great big tree that occupied 2/3 of the room. And you had to crawl underneath it to reach whatever was at the back, and it was just pine needles everywhere. I kind of miss the smell, but I don't miss the needles. You'd be picking up for weeks afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people are getting fake Christmas trees now, just to avoid the mess.
Yeah, it's quite amusing, isn't it, really? Because there we go out of our way to get all these fake Christmas trees and try to get ones that look real. Okay, why don't you just stick a real Christmas tree there in a bucket, and plant it out after Christmas?
Yeah. When you talked about, well, you just sort of briefly touched on Santa. I guess let's start with, who was Saint Nicholas and how did he become Santa Claus?
Okay. Well, Saint Nicholas is one of the Anglo-Scandinavian saints. He originates in the. I'm actually going to be a bit radical here. Most people have him as medieval, but I think he's a bit older than that. The Vikings under King Rollo, who was in charge of the Vikings in the 900s, they gradually got well. He was a convert or die Christian. You know, you don't argue with him because he's the king. And I strongly suspect that Saint Nicholas and quite a whole host of other saints in the Scandinavian form, I think they go back to the 900s. I think, 800, 900, 1000. I think that's when you're looking for the origins of the Saint Nicholas that we know now. He's a saint, he was very good with animals. He was very good in the outdoors. He was associated with the winter. His original colours are interesting because being that he's Anglo-Scandinavian, he's white. So you got the snow. So very often his robes are white. He's green because of the evergreen connection. So he's also, this idea of life, etc., etc. And he's brown. He's described as a kind of russet colour. And more often than not, it's the brown one that you run across. What is interesting is that, again, going off at a complete tangent here, in the American Civil War, there was a cartoonist called Thomas Nast. Now, Thomas Nast drew for Harper's Weekly, and in 1862, he drew the first Santa that started to go towards red. So most people go, the reason Santa Claus turned red is down to Coca-Cola. Yeah, everybody says that. Well, yeah, Coca-Cola, fine. Coca-Cola's like, capitalized on it. The big fat guy with the enormous beard and, bright, shiny Coca-Cola red, drinking a bottle of Coke. Yes, that's true. They capitalized on it. But this guy, Thomas Nast, actually drew Santa Claus in support of the Union during the American Civil War. So when he was cartooning, because he was sort of cartooning for Harper's Weekly, this developed over a period of about 30 years, this idea that slowly Santa Claus became red. So by the time you get to sort of 1892, which I think is the crucial year, he's red. At that point, he's red. So that's when everybody goes, oh, Coca-Cola, 1892. But no, actually, the first guy to do it was Thomas Nast, and he's taking Saint Nicholas as a character, as an Anglo-Scandinavian character, and he's just recoloring him basically over a period of time. But it's the idea that he started off as brown, then he went russet, then he went a sort of a reddy brown, then eventually he went red, and then eventually got nicked by Coca-Cola. Yeah, but he's quite a nice saint, Saint Nicholas. He's not a bad guy. I'm not going to go into it I could do like the whole, Catholic dictionary of saints bit, but I'm not going to do that. Folks want to know, Google him. There's loads of information about Saint Nicholas.
I think that sort of journey that you've just mentioned is funny because a lot of prior to this conversation, a lot of the knowledge that I had on Christmas was there was a lot of sort of ancient traditions that it sort of evolved into what we see today. But what sort of happened today is like the example with Coca-Cola and many other companies out there. They've got hold of all of this, and with their sort of capitalist nature, they've absolutely just marketed everything to such a high extent that you don't actually remember any. Because just before the call, I was speaking to Aaron, and my partner she was putting up the Christmas tree not long ago. And then I was like, I was just asking her, do you know why you're putting up the tree? What does it represent? She's born from a Catholic Christian family. And she had no idea. And she was just sort of oblivious to the fact that there was any ancient traditions. And it was just like, well, everyone does it, so let's put it up. And it just got me thinking, well, yeah, that's just the way marketing's just had an absolute spin on everything, that no one actually cares about why you do it. You just do it because you do it, because it comes up. You wait for the John Lewis advert every year, and then it's like, right, let's put my tree up.
It's like we've sort of hit a fork in the road where, down one side of it, you've got all the sources, the background to it, and the original traditions and how all these things came about, which, like you say, most people don't go down that road. That's sort of nerdy type people sat on Wikipedia for an hour, that's kind of where that kind of goes. So nobody bothers to go and check that. But I would heartily encourage anybody who's listening to this, and watching this, go and check it out, because there's some great stuff down there. And then the other side of the fork in the road is this idea that we now have modern day traditions which don't have very old origins. I can remember Christmas as we've got it now essentially developed in the 1960s and 70s, and it came out of that 70s prosperous period of time in the UK, and people sort of threw everything they could at it. And that's really, I think, when it became commercialized, when sort of the post-war Britain was like, yay, we're out of it now, and just went bonkers. So there's an argument that says actually that both forks in the road are equally correct. You can still keep the ancient traditions. I have no doubt whatsoever that there'll be people out on the 21st, harvesting mistletoe or having a bonfire or, sat under the stars doing what's been done for thousands of years. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong on the other side of it, hanging something new on the Christmas tree, or having a new tradition. Catholics are fantastic for absorbing stuff, actually. They tend to whatever's going on in a particular society, they will soak that up and make something of it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Some people are like, oh, you can't have this if it's Christian, you can't have that if it's Christian. And well, why not? For goodness sake, why not? I mean, Jesus came out of a tradition that had already had 2,000 or 3,000 years of soaking up all the races around it. If you walked up to Jesus speaking Aramaic and doing his teaching bit, he grew up in Egypt. So, you would not have had the character you would have expected. He would certainly not be, how he's portrayed in traditional views, traditional paintings. So why not? Why not sponge this up? And again, Catholics, brilliant. I mean, the virgin birth. I've got to say something, on that really, because that is the essence. That is, the power of Christian Christmas and what have you. Well, the virgin birth actually was more to do with a sort of legal federal marriage of the god and goddess. If a virgin gives birth to a child under Jewish law, Old Testament Jewish law, then those two are joined for life. That's that. Boom. That's how it is. That's why Joseph disappears. That's why there aren't any brothers and sisters by Mary. Yes, there are others that are adopted into the family, but no, Mary and Jesus stay together right to the very end till he dies on the cross. They are a couple, but not a reproducing couple, if you see what I mean. They stay together right to the very end. And that's so important because people are arguing the toss and they're saying, oh, we have to keep a Christian Christmas, and this, that, and the other. Whoa, hang on a minute, because if God sends somebody to earth to save mankind, that somebody has to tick every box. And that's the big, shocking revelation of the whole sort of Christmas thing. Jesus does. He doesn't just tick Christian boxes, because there weren't any Christians in the 1st century AD, not as we'd understand them. He ticks all the boxes. So, pagan, Norse, Celt, Egyptian, Phoenician, wherever you want to go look, you'll find a crossover. You'll find a connection. So in a sense, I mean, let's come right into the 21st century now. You've got these, people releasing records at Christmas about, uniting the world and let's bring humanity together and this, that, and the other. In a strange way, they've actually hit the nail on the head. I think that's what Christmas is all about. One race keeping one festival pretty much the same everywhere, and it does embrace everything. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I really don't. I see it as it's a stepping stone. That is, if you like, it's the true message of Christmas. It's a stepping stone for humanity. Stop killing each other and just get on with it.
Yeah. No, it's true, yeah.
It's just not a bad message for Christmas. That's, I don't normally get religious and political, by the way. So I hope what I've just said is neither religious nor political. I don't want you to get deplatformed for me ranting on here about Christmas.
Oh, don't worry about that.
Oh dear.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying completely, because and the fact that it comes around every year, it gives that this sort of could be seen as a reminder to everyone, if you treat it the right way, as a reminder of like togetherness. And that even comes in with the gift giving, like just give gifts to everyone, no matter what it is. Give gifts to everyone. And
I mean, if you look spiritually, the spiritual message, which is what we always get at Christmas, etc., that is not a bad message if it's, if it unites, if it levels, if it levels it. But there's also, instead of looking upwards, look downwards as well. There's also an earthly message, and all these guys who are into the green stuff and all the rest of it, save the world, save the planet, and all that. There's even an element of that because you've got this evergreen, the idea of the planet itself, especially in the northern hemisphere, everything dies in winter and then it comes back in the spring, it renews. But we're reminded of that as well at Christmas. Like I said, with the holly, the ivy, because that's an evergreen, the trees, the mistletoe. It's about life, it's about life returning, and the wheel of the year, the fact that the seasons are changing and they're turning. So you've got a double whammy. I think this is why it's lasted so long, Christmas. People say, oh, can't be doing Christmas. Jehovah's Witnesses don't keep it. They're like, let's just do away with it. Mind you, they don't keep any dates, and I kind of understand that. But I'd never get rid of Christmas. I'd just educate. That's the key to it. If people understand what it's all about, you'd be like, whoa, it doesn't matter what religion you follow or where you live or what you do, you can buy into this one. This one is not, there are no negatives apart from perhaps Krampus, but depends how you behaved. Depends how you behaved in the last year.
Yeah, I've always said what I love about Christmas is it's a time of year where everyone takes time off work and everyone's like available just to spend time with each other. And that's the main thing about it. Everyone takes that week off.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything's shut down and you can just like spend time with each other and have a laugh and enjoy your life at the end of the year.
That is a fantastic point, actually, because it doesn't really matter who you look at in terms of origins. So you can go way back into the BC period, and you can imagine, some Bronze Age or Iron Age Celts are getting together on the darkest day of the year, and they're all round the fire, in the roundhouse, wishing that the cold weather would go away. And, they're checking the food to make sure they've got enough to get through the next couple of months before the spring comes, things like that. But that focus is family. That's what you're focusing on. You're focusing on the family. So again, that aspect of Christmas, fantastic point to bring that up. Getting people together who you value, who you love. I've got to, well, let's make it personal. I mean, 2021, the last of my generation died. My dad passed away. So that tradition for me kind of fizzled out. The mum, dad, Christmas, open fire, Christmas tree. And I really miss it. I really do genuinely miss it. So that's something valuable. It is something, valuable that we should continue. Absolutely. Good point. Very good point.
It's almost as Christmas needs to be pulled back a bit from the way it's commercialized because it's sort of going away from the point of it by commercializing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are changing the form of what they do at Christmas. I've noticed this, especially since we've come out of the pandemic, out of lockdown. What they're doing now is instead of just buying nonsense. I mean, I can remember as a kid, you'd buy a load of plastic toys that would all be destroyed by the end of Boxing Day. You know what I mean? They were just things to keep. They were things to keep you occupied while mum and dad made dinner. We've all been there. That's basically what it was all about. But the change now is, I think people are putting more value and more purpose into what they're buying at Christmas. They're not buying tat. They're not buying rubbish. They're not just the idea of a deodorant set and a box of chocolates, and a plastic toy for the kid, that's gone out the window. And I just think that's brilliant. Get rid of that. I think people are buying the food they like, they're buying the drink they like, they're buying useful things. I mean, that's the big emphasis, I think, is on useful things.
No more presents for the sake of presents.
No, yeah, we can't afford to be doing that anyway. Let's be sensible about this, and get stuff that we can use that's going to last all year, which again is going back to the origins of Christmas, because that's what you did. You examined what you had to make sure you could get through the next 12 months. That was the looking ahead bit. So yeah, I think people have sort of have floated back to that. Yeah, good bit of common sense creeping in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just to take you back on a point that you mentioned,
yeah.
it's kind of away from Christmas in a sense, but
No, it's okay.
you mentioned how Jehovah's Witnesses don't keep any dates,
Yeah.
and you said you said that. Well, I don't know if you agree or disagree with that sort of route, but what are their reasons behind not keeping dates, and why could this be seen as a good thing?
Um, well, I think there's two reasons. Jehovah's Witnesses, generally speaking, have two sets of scriptures. So obviously they have the biblical stuff and they have their own. In both of those, the keeping of dates, the keeping of times and seasons, and all the rest of it, um, they're not listed. There aren't dates given. The calendars are all different, and generally speaking, it's not encouraged. I'm not going to say it's not actively discouraged, but it's not encouraged either. So what they've done is they've gone back to those writings and they've said, well, does it really matter? If we've gone through another year, or we've gone through birthdays, we've gone through another age thing. In a sense, they are artificial constructs. They're not. They don't follow. Any. It's hard to describe it unless you've got a concept of time. Time really is interstellar. It's, as I said right at the very beginning, it's astrological and astronomical. So it's working on a different time clock. None of the clocks we use and none of the calendars we use nowadays are tied into that. Um, so I can kind of see where they're coming from, and I think also they've sort of reacted against the commercial side of it. As a movement they've grown out of the late Victorian era, so they're reacting against that commercial side of it. So again, it's pluses and minuses, it's extremes. You might have some billionaire somewhere, that buys all these kids a car at Christmas, but then at the other end, you've got, the Jehovah's Witnesses who won't buy anything because they won't even recognize the existence of the day. So you've got those two extremes. And in some ways, I kind of feel for both of them. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think, if you've worked all your life and managed to become a billionaire, why not? But at the same time, if you don't want to, play by those rules, you don't want to work to that particular game plan. Okay, fair enough. I'm quite convinced that there'll be a little tribe on Flores Island in the Philippines somewhere that, it's sunny all the time and they don't give a toss because they just have everything all the time. And they seriously won't know where they are in terms of festivals and stuff like that. But they're equally right. Each to their own, thing.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of get what you're saying,
Yeah,
well, from the Jehovah's Witness standpoint,
yeah.
because we've artificially put meaning on a lot of things. Birthdays, for example, we've just artificially said this is an important day.
Yeah, it's what human beings do. I mean, I could never work it out as a kid, really, because when you're born, shouldn't that be one, not zero? So why, when you get to the end of your first year, when you're already one, do you have your first birthday? Do you see what I mean? So depending on how you look at how time works, that's a tough nut to crack. It depends how you look at it.
I think there
And
are
Pete,
some like
well,
I think there are some cultures that class you as one as soon as you're born. I think
yeah,
that's is it Korea? I think I'm Korea
yeah,
man for some reason.
yeah. Because technically speaking, for the whole of those first 12 months, you are in your first year. Um, I always get confused because my birthday's in December anyway. So I'm one of these people, oh, we'll buy you presents at Christmas, you can have them then. So you always get the two pushed together and you never get anything as good as everybody else. But anyway, that's my moan about Christmas. Please don't be born in December. It's not a good time. Uh, so yeah, I can feel for that. I get the idea, and a lot of other cultures as well buy gifts at other times. They have different festivals to the festivals we have, and for different purposes. They exchange throughout the year. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But for example, like Islam, they don't celebrate Christmas, but they celebrate Eid, which is
yeah,
sort of their own like their own sort of path to something to celebrate.
yeah. Again, it's very similar in terms of, I mean, we've discussed the background to, the idea of going into the new year, checking your resources, time, seasons, etc. It's still got the same flavor. It's just that has traveled, if you like, from the east to the west. So when it's kept over here, it's kind of it doesn't sort of merge in, if you like, with the way we've done things over here all along. But it's still a valid festival. It's just the same as what would have happened in Roman times. They wouldn't have kept it at the same time as us. The Vikings wouldn't necessarily have kept it at the same time as us. I can imagine the Vikings and Saxons having a right ding dong, because they never kept anything on the same days, so it must have been absolute chaos. The only thing that is consistent, as I said at the beginning, is this idea of midwinter. You can't dodge that. Everything, all calendars take their lead from longest days, shortest days, and quarter days. They all take the lead from that, because that is nature. That's how, when the planet was wound up and set going, that's how it was set going. So even in Islam, they have times and seasons. They know where they are in the year based on what's going on, up in the heavens. I can't say calendric, yeah, calendar wise.
Yeah. So I've got a bit of a far-reaching question, depending on how you take it, I guess.
Okay.
So the importance of Jesus and Jesus being Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
How important does that make sort of let's use the land of Egypt.
Yeah.
And we know there's a lot of queries and questions and toing and froing about the land of Egypt because of what's built on there. I guess the question I want to ask is, how significant is the land of Egypt and the things that are built on it? And how does that connect to the fact Jesus was born there?
Well, he's not born there, actually. He's born in Bethlehem. That's where the birth story happens. But then Herod decides that he doesn't want any competitors and decides he's going to go and wipe a lot of the youngsters in that area out, which is, typical, slightly tetchy, bonkers Roman way of dealing with things. They weren't renowned for being the most stable of rulers. So off he goes, this killing of the firstborn and that. But Mary and Joseph were warned in a vision. So basically they escape to Egypt when Jesus is about 3 years old. So that's when he gets to Egypt. And he's there till he's 12. Now, that is a significant period of development in anybody's life. So really, as you rightly say, we should be looking to Egypt to find out what's going on. What's interesting is the Coptic Church know exactly where he went and what he did. So if you go over to Egypt and you chat to the Coptic Church and say, where's your sacred sites associated with Jesus, they'll hand you a map. Literally, they hand you a map and go, these are the villages where he stayed, and this is where he went, this is what he did. And then if you look at a lot of the early scriptures as well, a lot of stuff's coming out of Alexandria. They had the big library at Alexandria. There's lots of stuff buried in the desert, a lot of the alternative, Nag Hammadi library, Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. A lot of that material's coming out of Egypt. So clearly it's a huge melting pot and it has a huge part to play. And the real key to looking at what's happening to Jesus, when he gets back, he's 12. So in his 12th year, he's supposed to go to the temple, which he does. The family take him to the temple. And then when the family leave, bearing in mind that they're tribal, so the whole family up sticks and off it goes, they leave him behind by accident. It's a wonderful story. So they have to turn round. So Mary has to go back and collect him. And he's sat in the temple, running rings round the temple scholars. He's at 12 years old. He's light years ahead of them, miles and miles ahead of them. But if you actually look at what's going on in the Old Testament, bearing in mind that's all they had, because they didn't have the New Testament, because Jesus is based on the Old Testament. Most of it's Egyptian. Moses is an Egyptian. Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, are written by Moses. They're written by an Egyptian, and so on and so on and so on. So when you start looking at the connections, you can't dodge Egypt. Some people, and I don't necessarily buy into this, but some people think that the Christmas tree, for example, is an extension of a thing called the Djed column, And the Djed column in Egypt is a hieroglyph, and it's also a physical column that during the Djed festival, they would put this column up and they would erect it as the pole, the central pole, not as in pole star, to Sirius. Sirius is there on the belt of Orion, the center star. That's what this thing it was set up to dedicate at a certain time of the year when Sirius was in a certain position. Some people have said, oh, the Djed columns, that's the origin of the Christmas tree. Trouble is, there's like, a couple of thousand years gap between what they were doing in Egypt and now. So I wouldn't go quite so far as to extend that. But when you start looking at, like you say, Egyptian religion and the influence it had on Jesus and what that whole background that's coming out, the entire Hebrew nation, it's Joseph's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, let my people go, and all that. It's the sons that then go on to become the tribes that then go on to become the nation. There's 15 of them, incidentally, but we won't go into that. So that's another story. They're not the 12 tribes of Israel. There's actually 15 of them. One of them dies out, and two of them go from two separate sons. But so yeah, it's interesting. The Egyptian origins, absolutely. I'm not quite sure how that fits into Christmas, though. Really, it fits into Jesus. And I think it makes the point that, a lot of this is tied into the heavens. The star watchers, if you like, are the people that set the ball rolling. But if you go down that route, I mean, you can drift way back into prehistory, Stonehenge, whatever, go where you want. They were all focused on the heavens. They were looking to the sky for the guidance. Yeah, good question.
So we're stepped away from Christmas a little bit. We're focusing on Jesus. I've got a question about Jesus.
Go on.
It's true that he went missing for 18 years of his life. Is that correct? So there's no record of what he did during those 18 years.
Yeah, nobody wrote anything down about him after his childhood, particularly.
Do you have any theories of what happened then? Because I did read one, and it said he went to India for 18 years and learned a lot of magical practices and occultism.
Well, you can go in two directions with this as well, actually. One direction, scriptures that never made it into the Bible. So if you start to look at some of the writings that have been recently discovered in the libraries that I mentioned, Nag Hammadi, Dead Sea Scrolls, etc., some of them cover the gap. Okay. And some of the things they write, I mean, the classic one's the Gospel of Thomas. Go and have a look at the Gospel of Thomas. Some of the things they write about Jesus, it's almost like God in human form trying to find his feet. So you get to understand why maybe people didn't really pay any attention to that part of his life. Because to be honest, there's times when he's a bit of a plonker and, he's kind of exercising his power in ways that you would be like, oh, I'm not sure that, he's making birds out of clay and making them fly, and killing his enemies at teenagers that brassed him off and then bringing them back to life again, and and you're like, this is, you can see what's happening. It's garbled stories that have come out of the time that he spent growing up, that have then been recorded, and they don't scan. But in all truth, the idea that he went to Egypt, that's the second part of this, that doesn't come out of that period. The Egyptian thing is, people believe that he didn't die on the cross, that he survived, and that he went off and taught in India and places like that. And there's tons of writing to say that Jesus went to India and taught in India. But the problem is, when Jesus was alive, round about 22 to 23% of males in Jerusalem were called Jesus. Because Jesus is actually Joshua, it's Ishua. And Joshua was a phenomenally popular name, tremendously popular name, to the point where there's at least two other people in Jesus' family that have got the name Jesus. The reason we use Jesus is to differentiate Jesus from Ishua, from Joshua. So there's at least two other people there. And what I think's happened is, there was even Jesus, there's a twin. There's a twin of Jesus that looks like him and behaves like him and acts like him. And you look at the chaos that follows Jesus's death, and you think, Well, yeah, why not? Why not some of these people making it all the way to India? So, I think I'm taking the road of least resistance here without going into too much detail. And the road of least resistance is to go, yeah, they're right. A Jesus did make it to India and did spread the gospel, in the same way that all the other disciples scattered. They all scattered across the known world. So there's no reason to believe that it wasn't a Jesus that went there and taught. But it's not the same guy that was nailed, on Golgotha. It's not the same character. Same teaching, could even be the same family, but it's not the same person. So I don't know. I hope that kind of answers it.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's so long ago that no one can actually narrow down exactly what happened and what Jesus' like movements were.
Well, there's enough archaeology and there's enough extra stuff written down and extra pieces of information to be able to sort of piece together in quite detail some of those gaps. You can fill the gaps in with the extra bits, but the problem is that people are not encouraged to look. That's the problem. So it is a mystery, but it's a mystery created almost from ignorance. I'm going to get a plug in here. I'm in the process of putting together a book with a working title, Keys to the Temple. And basically, that's what it looks at. It looks at all the stuff from right at the very beginning, Genesis 1, verse 1, right the way through to how the hell did we get here? It covers everything, but it's the bits that people don't know are out there. I did another book this year, the Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. It's a King Arthur book. And the reason I did it was that people just don't know what's available. They have absolutely no idea. No one's going to go and look on the internet for something unless they know it exists. So that's kind of everything's out there somewhere. So as an author, I see that as my job is not to suddenly come up with something. My job is to get hold of people and point them in the right direction. You need to go look over there or go look over there. That's kind of how I see my role in writing.
That's
Which,
really important that you say that because I would say I'm fairly new into sort of the spiritual side of
mm,
life and looking into sort of sacred ancient times and stuff like that. But I mean, just typing in stuff on YouTube, you can easily go down these routes of conspiracy quite easily.
yeah,
So it's kind of hard to find new information without being led astray, if you know what I mean. So it is actually really useful what you're saying to say this
yeah,
is all the stuff that I found, which you won't be able to know unless like someone told you. It's like
exactly.
mentoring people in a sense of what's available and what's out there.
Yeah, I mean, the books that I write they're not sort of meaningless catalogs. They do scan, they read as a proper book. But just having a list at the end of the book of stuff that you can go and check out, that alone makes it worth grabbing. For example, the Arthur book. Nobody knows what's out there. Oh no, there's absolutely nothing written about King Arthur. Doesn't exist. This, that, and the other. Wrong. My fifth chapter of that book occupies a fifth of the volume of the book. It's 488-page books. There's got to be a couple of hundred pages of references at the end. There's tons of stuff. People just don't know where to go and look. So, that's the plan for the Keys to the Temple. I'm basically going to do the same kind of thing with that and just go, oh, if you looked at this, if you considered that, well, there's always this, and but not to be limited by people saying, oh, the only book you can read is the Bible, which incidentally is 66 separate books merged together. That's what the Bible is. So, rather than just focusing on that, I'm not knocking it. It's brilliant. What a source book. But there are others. There are other things that you need to consider, even if it's only as social comment. It fills in the background. Like knowing that Jesus went to Egypt. Why not put the Coptic material in so that you know where he went and what he did? Why not?
Yeah, it's more of a
Mm.
well-rounded view rather than just going off
Yeah,
a book and then everything in this book is the truth and everything else is false.
yeah. Well,
Mm.
even if it's entirely true, if it's 100% true, you've only got 66 books of truth because nobody has the monopoly on truth. Truth does not solely exist in one place at one time in one form. And to be honest with you, there are issues. I mean, people are going to, chew the knuckles when I say this, but there are some issues in the Bible that are not covered. There are things in there where you're not going to get guidance. I'll give you an example. They're going to love this. There's quite a few of them, but this is really, let's get a bit edgy here. Nowhere in the entire Bible is there any reference of any kind to lesbians. They're not in there. There's loads of stuff to do with blokes doing different things and angels doing different things, but they never get a mention because, quite frankly, the people that wrote the Bible didn't care. It wasn't an issue. I'm being honest here. There's no reproduction going to result from that. Nothing's going to happen. There's nothing. You're not going to suddenly, have some kind of spiritual cataclysm and end up, going to hell. And even in the Garden of Eden, it was the bloke that made the mistake. Yeah, fine. The woman eats the fruit, but she didn't disobey God. It was the bloke that disobeyed God. And that gets you off on the footing. That's where the entire book goes, But no, I'm afraid if you're out there and, that's the path you've chosen for your life, you're not going to get any guidance out of the Bible. It's not there. The subject does not exist. So what do you do with something like that? You don't have any choice but to go somewhere else. You have to go look elsewhere, And the Bible is like that. There are issues in there, I mean, to really get modern, where on earth in the Bible does it talk about artificial intelligence? Where are you going to get guidance on AI? It'll give you some background on humans and how we function. It'll give you the spiritual side of it, but it's not going to help you when it comes to, what the hell is AI? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it alive? So there are some questions that you're not going to find the answers to. Time to expand, time, like you say, to have a look at other issues.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because with the lesbian scenario, because people who choose certain paths to lead, they might be a bit confused, they might be searching for guidance, and at the forefront of a lot of people's mind, it would be go to the Bible for guidance. And if you're going to read that for the guidance in that particular scenario, you're going to come away very, very disappointed and probably worse off than before you went looking for the guidance.
Well, yeah, there's only two references in there that are any use. And it's the Apostle Paul, I think, in both instances, where he says, in the end times, men will deviate from ordinary sexual practices. And you're like, okay, well, that still doesn't help us. And then he says, ladies in church should wear hats. Okay. Oh, that's really not helpful. Oh, the other belter that they always wheel out, which always makes me laugh. Blokes should wear blokes' clothes and women should wear women's clothes. They shouldn't dress as each other. Okay, hang on a minute. Okay, back in biblical times, women wore trousers and men wore dresses.
Oh, yeah.
So does that mean we should all dump the Galabea because that's what most of them were wearing then? Because that's a dress, and the culottes, the kind of trousers that you see the genies wearing. The ladies wore those back then because of decency, So hang on a minute, that gives you no help whatsoever. It's no use whatsoever. Well, that's another thing as well that everybody should do. They should try and contextualize. People read the Bible, they grab hold of little bits, they pull it out of context completely, and they don't even use it to interpret itself, let alone try and put it in a social context. What are they actually talking about? What was actually going on at the time when this stuff was written? I can't wait to get this book out. This book is going to be banned by every major religion on planet Earth. I know,
When are you hoping to get that book released?
It's been in process a long time. I'm going to say, don't be shocked by this, but the King Arthur book took 45 years to get into print. By the time we get this one into print, it's going to be about 47, 48 years. But the clock is ticking fast, and I'm going to try and get it out in the next year to 2 years. But the research that's been done for the Keys to the Temple is just unbelievable in comparison to what I did for Arthur. There's just so much more, and it's so much deeper. It's not so much a rabbit hole as a sort of a gigantic borehole that I've fallen into. And I'm still going. I've not quite hit the Earth's core yet, but I'm heading there.
Yeah. Oh no, that's amazing. What was it sort of on a personal level? What was it that sort of inspired you or got you on the road that you're onto it?
Wow. Okay. Well, it is Christmas, so I suppose I can get a little bit Christian on you. I started off. This is going to amaze you. When I was a kid, I was basically adopted by a witch coven. So I started off in the occult. I started off as a witch, not a modern day witch. Witches as they used to be. So a hedge witch, an ordinary herbalism and all that sort of thing, but a lot of magic and a lot of the occult. The occult just means hidden. The Bible itself is an occult book because the mysteries are hidden. So that just means hidden. And then I had a conversion experience just before I reached 16, because you get initiated into adult sort of occultism at 16. I had a conversion experience at a weekend away that it's going to sound a bit weird, but all the teenagers were sent on this weekend to wreck it because these evangelicals were causing problems for the witch coven. So we were all sent to wreck it. Anyway, and I had this conversion experience, and it was quite dramatic, quite radical. I vanished and came back after about 20 minutes. And I was a different person. I went through that sort of whole transformation thing. But then when I came back, I was a real problem. I was a real problem to the church, because I came back with this, okay, this Bible, this is my new book of shadows. If it says it, then it says it. That's what we'll do. And we'll have a go and see if it works, this, that, and the other. So my catchphrase for many years was, I've been thrown out of better churches than this one. Because that's kind of, for the first few years, I was the bloke that stuck his hand up and upset the vicar. Oh, it doesn't say that. And after a few years of that, where you rapidly realise that it's churchianity and it's a religion, and what you need to do. Half of these people have never read their own book. The hats off to Islam. I've got to say, they read their book. They read their scriptures. They know the word. But Christianity doesn't. They don't. They really don't get stuck into the same level. So that's really what did it. It was that frustration. I'm writing stuff and I'm thinking, why have I never read this anywhere? Why do people not know this? So I suppose, once an occultic, always an occultic. It's that Gnosticism, isn't it? Gnosis, knowledge, And then about goodness knows how many years, 10, 15, 20 years later, somebody came up to me and went, "You're a Gnostic." Like it was some kind of insult. "You're a Gnostic." And I'm like, do you know what? If the hat fits, yeah, I am. That's what I am. I'm a Gnostic. So it's basically it's a lifetime of 1978 was that conversion experience. I've been digging, literally as a literary archaeologist. I've been digging ever since that. And it has thrown up some really big issues. And I've discovered I'm not alone. Since the sort of 80s, 90s, well, 70s, 80s, 90s, there's been a big spate in books coming out. You finish up with the Da Vinci Code at the end of the day. There's this big spate of books where people are digging into tradition and saying, well, maybe that's not how it is. I think it's time to sort of pull it back. My book will be a reaction. Well, it's a long reaction, but a reaction kind of against that, and just pulling it back and saying, "Whoa, hang on a minute. This is the academic foundation to this. You need to read this." But I'll write it in a popular form. I'll write it in a way that everybody can read. You never know. Might start a revolution, as the Beatles said. You never know.
Yeah, it's almost like you was a rock star of the churches, right?
Well, I was a drummer. I was professional for 21 years.
Oh, really?
They didn't like that either. Yeah, I've had 4 record deals, and I did it as a job. I mean, it sounds odd because I was an archaeologist and a drummer at the same time. But I trained as an archaeologist, and then I got a record deal. So it was like, what do I do? So I was off in the music business for years. So I've done that as well. I retired in the 1990s, and that's when I ended up doing television and writing books, for my sins.
So if one of our audience were to sort of start somewhere with your books, where would you recommend them to go?
Oh, I can say that in one word. It's sort of the easiest question to answer all night. It's Amazon. Just go to Amazon. I mean, type my name into Amazon, and what you should finish up with is 9. There's 9 of them in total. 3 of them are Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries, which is a regional history series that looks at what's going on up here. Because as you guys well know, the North very often gets ignored. So that's where I started. You start where you are, don't you? So Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries 1, 2, and 3, you'll get those. Then you'll get 3 books that I did for John Hunt Publishing. You'll get Disappearing Ninth Legion, which was the legion that marched out of York, never to be seen again. Rosemary Sutcliffe's Eagle of the Ninth was based on that story. Life and Times of the Real Robin Hood. He was still up north, north of the Trent. That's out there as well. That was described by the president of the Worldwide Robin Hood Society as the best book on Robin Hood ever written. So yeah, go grab that one. Revealing the Green Man will be the next one. And then you're starting to edge a bit more spiritual rather than archaeological, historical. That looks at planet Earth, and how we got to the point where there's this image of the Green Man. So that starts filling in some of the background. Then with Philip Mantle on Flying Disc Press, you've got Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. Absolute fantastic piece of archaeoscience. Eventually it will become dated, but at the moment it covers these enormous stretched heads and crystal skulls, as the name suggests. Next one's your Polychronicon, Merlin, Joseph, and Arthur. If you order that as a Christmas present, get the hardback. Philip, the publisher, when he got his copy of the hardback, he was like, "Oh, this is the best book I've ever done." It's honestly, the hardback is so sexy. It's brilliant. So I'd recommend that. That's one I would say, try and get the hardback. And then the latest one is Europe's Roswell, 40 years since impact. And that is actual physical evidence of an unidentified flying object that impacted into a forest in Wales in 1983. And that's the one I'm kind of touring on this year. I'm doing that. I also appeared on Ancient Aliens this year as well, which I still find, I find that hilariously funny. I'm in season 19 doing crop circles. I still find that really funny because I am actually a proper archaeologist, you know what I mean? And 20 years ago, the idea of putting aliens and ancient together in the same program, that would have just not happened. But now times are changing, things are changing,
Yeah. What do you think it is that's caused that change?
I would like to think that the general population, having access to things like the internet, and having been locked down for a period of time, I'd like to think the general population have started to inquire a lot more into that question, where did we come from? Why are we here? How did we get here? Those kind of questions were only asked by professionals in the 70s and 80s, Then, like I say, the books ballooned about all kinds of topics. A lot of them got very religious, and you finish up with the Da Vinci Code, 1990s going into 2000s. And then science has started to get involved. And I think that all of that has fired people up. And I think that might end up with us going in the right direction. I think we're going to see next Christmas, definitely. Just to try and keep us back on topic.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll survive. I think we'll definitely survive another year. And then things are going to change. I think things will slowly change. Certainly the books I've written in recent times are looking at issues that might change, might take us in certain directions, especially Crystal Skulls and Human Heads and Europe's Roswell. I take a stab there at the end of those 2 books as to what might be going on and where we might be going, as a sort of human race, if you like, which hopefully people will take to heart.
What are your thoughts on Graham Hancock and his work?
Oh wow, Graham Hancock. He is a phenomenal researcher. I mean, one of the books I love is The Sign and the Seal, where he goes in search of the Ark of the Covenant, and I think he nailed that one. And mostly I'd say sort of 80-85%. I think I support him. Sorry, I think I actually support what he's doing. I'm sort of behind him. I think he's one of the better, members of that group. Some of the others just go off on flights of fancy and they make stuff up. And I'm not going to put any names to that, but I know that they do because I've met some of them. But I think Graham's good. I think Graham's one of the good guys. So I'm glad you mentioned him in particular.
What do you think about some of the backlash he's getting?
It's always difficult if you upset the establishment. I mean, my big one is I'm a total disbeliever in evolution. I think science and genetics, DNA and what have you, I think it's been sunk without trace. You know what I mean? And Darwin never said it in the first place. I mean, he came up with the laws of adaptation. Yeah, of course, species adapt. That's basically origin of species. The whole evolution thing, I think, is just nonsense, absolute nonsense. I'll nail the colours to the mast, and that's what I'm going to get savaged for. I kind of stuck my head above the foxhole, and I'm going to get it shot off for that. I know that's coming, but who cares? You know what I mean? When you get to a certain age, which you can clearly see I'm heading for, you don't care anymore. So. I think Graham has suffered the same fate. He's stuck his head above the foxhole and he's stated his case. And in many cases, he does it with, good evidence, really good evidence. And people are just taking pot shots, Latest book, I can give you an example of this, Europe's Roswell. That's come out, the book's out, obviously. I did an interview for The Sun. Well, no problem there. Newspaper. They did a little sort of video piece that went up online, and some I won't name names because I don't name names. But this professor guy has come out and done a 6-minute long video clip where he basically says this debris is either off a drone or a stealth fighter, and he puts forward his case, having never read the book. So he puts forward a fairly convincing case, but with no evidence whatsoever, because the evidence is all in the book. And that's a really good example of what people do. So you go online now and you find this joker giving his piece about, yeah, fine. Yeah, we know all that about stealth fighters. That we knew all that back in the 1980s when this thing crashed. But that's not what it is. So like you were saying earlier on about, the stuff you find out there on the internet, and, anybody anywhere can put up pretty much anything about anything, whether they know the background to it or not, And that's what's happened to Graham. It's happened to loads, Andrew Collins and David Roll, and lots of people in that group of alternative archaeologists. Probably most of the cast of Ancient Aliens over the years. They've all had pot shots taken at them. But if Darwin never asked the question, he'd never have written The Origin of Species. It's to say, people like Tesla and Einstein and people like that. If they don't ask the question, you're never going to get the answer.
Me and Cam were talking about this the other day. Do you think it's because you're essentially attacking the foundations of what their research is based on? Which, if you're attacking the foundations of it, and so many people have researched based on this one foundation, you're attacking a whole subset of people, aren't you?
I will share a story from archaeology, okay, and this will explain a lot. In archaeology, there is an unwritten rule that you don't destroy somebody else's career until they're dead. Okay. But you can imagine how that holds the whole process up. So somebody in the 1970s or 80s writes a whole complete pile of steaming nonsense, but then they decide that they're going to live to 102. So you can't do anything about that because they're still earning a living off it. They're still writing and producing stuff, and that's their job. That's what they do as a living. So if you're part of the profession, you're part of that circuit, especially academia, you're not allowed to just go knife somebody else in the back. You just don't do that. So as you'll have noticed during this interview, I've studiously avoided naming the names of the guilty, because if that's what they want to go and do, that's what they're going to go and do. And they hopefully would extend the same, grace to me. They're not going to stab me in the back for what I'm doing, because I haven't done that to them. It's that do unto others thing. But by hell, it doesn't half hold things up. You know what I mean? If 3 people come up with absolute rubbish and they all decide that they're going to live for a century, you're not going to, what I mean? You're looking at you can rubbish Darwin because he's dead, because that's the 1800s. But anybody born in the 1900s potentially could still be alive, and their estate is still earning money from what they've produced. So it's how far do you go? So
because then as well, if people base their theories on what Darwin's learned, and then you're rubbishing Darwin, you're essentially rubbishing the people who have based their theories on what Darwin's learned. So it's like an ongoing cycle.
It is an ongoing cycle. Yeah, it is an ongoing cycle. But what I'm really pleased about now is that what people are doing is they're not necessarily attacking people. But what you are allowed to do now, which is something new, is you can attack their ideas. You can attack the science. What they're talking about, the actual subject matter. Nowadays, you're allowed to have a go at that. You know, I mean, Darwinism's a great example because that's grown into a religion. Basically, that's what it is. Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. That's what people believe. You know, so that's a really extreme example. But nowadays, this questioning, you know, is good. I think that's
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah, fantastic. But yeah, good
Yeah,
point. That's why
because
it happens.
if you look at, for example, supermarkets, they compete with each other, and therefore there's quite a healthy market of supermarkets going up. But within other industries where you sort of take that competition out completely, it does stagnate it quite a lot, and it makes things a lot like slower, and
Yeah,
you
you've got the
just
idea. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it really drags things back. And even though you know the truth, and even though you can prove what the truth is, and even if that truth turns out to be absolute, an absolute truth, you're not allowed to say it because you're going to, you know, assassinate somebody else. That for me, that doesn't work. I mean, it goes against the Gnostic in me. It goes against Gnosticism. You know, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. You know, that's what you say. You know, that's it. That's what it is. I have got a bit of a reputation for doing that. You know, sooner or later, someone's going to come along and stick me on a TV show, and that'll be the end of my career. But you know, like I say, you get to that certain age. But yeah, so yeah, it's a good point. Things do get held up. Supermarkets are competing with each other now. I noticed they slag each other off for pricing structure. You know,
Yeah.
hey, you know, we might be Tesco, but we're just as cheap as Lidl. You know, and
Yeah.
Asda, but we're just as cheap as Aldi. You know, so
I think
yeah, that
yeah,
that that's
I think either in Tesco or Asda, I was in there the other day, and it was like on the shelf
Yeah,
an item, and
Tesco.
on the price it was like, this is cheaper than Aldi.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You
you
get
do
yeah.
Aldi price match and you label it as Aldi price match.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Sainsbury's quality at the same price as Lidl, you know, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, if they can get away with that, I suppose, you know, in the broader sense, you know, why can't we all have a bash now and again? Oh dear. Actually, that's kind of brought us back to Christmas, hasn't it? Christmas advertising.
Yeah, Christmas advertising is
uh,
crazy. Um, yeah, but
hmm,
so I guess one question I had to do with Christmas, just to
yeah.
flick it back really quick, it was in my mind. It's a little question, but it is kind of still burning. So you talked about the mistletoe quite a lot. Where do you think or believe kissing under the mistletoe comes from? Because I saw that on a movie the other day.
Yeah, that's a belting question. You have to go right way back to find the origins of where mistletoe actually appears. It's recorded, I think it's Tacitus, one of the Roman writers, writing on behalf of Julius Caesar, mentions that the Druids have got this obsession with mistletoe. And up to that point, that was the only reference we had. But you've actually unwittingly brought this back to the north of England, because if you look at Lindo Man, which was the sacrifice bog body that was found at Wilmslow in Cheshire, when they did the analysis on Lindo Man, they discovered that the night he died, the night that he was sacrificed, the meal that he had, one of the ingredients in the bread, it was like a flat bread, it was more like a pizza base that he ate. One of the ingredients was mistletoe berries. So whether or not something to do with that life and death or fertility, or even, dare I say, the Green Man, because if you go into that book, Revealing the Green Man, I discuss Lindo Man because he was painted green from head to foot in copper when he was sacrificed. So he is, in effect, he's the first scientifically proven green man. Physically, he was a green man. And in his gut was the remains of his last meal, which was mistletoe, included mistletoe. Some people think it has a mild hallucinogenic quality. Some people think it has a mild anesthetic quality. So they've looked at the science as to why it would be in there. But from a religious point of view, you're sending this guy, the Celts were sending this guy onto the next world. People think actually to debate the problems with the Romans, to try and, you know, bring them, you know, help from the other side, from the Celtic otherworld. They think that's why he was sent on his way. But they thought mistletoe was powerful enough and important enough to do that. And it's an evergreen, as I said earlier on. It doesn't die. So I think the idea of kissing under the mistletoe, it's a very old idea. It goes back, it's pre-Victorian. It probably goes back Georgian. It might go back to the 1700s. It might even go back to the 1600s, because when they had, oh, what do they call them? Maypoles. very often they'd stick a bunch of mistletoe on the maypole as well. So it's that fertility, it's that coming together, male and female. But it's also a wish for that to last and for that to be fertile, for it to continue beyond that. So there's so many dimensions to mistletoe, like I say, spiritual, otherworldly, evergreen, lasting, etc., etc. So they've obviously brought the life energy. The whole idea of life comes into that, and I think that answers the question. I think that is the reason why people kiss under the mistletoe, in the hope that that romance will last and it will have longevity and it'll produce a fruitful, relationship in the future. I think that's where it goes from. The Vikings are interesting because I can't remember which god it was now. I think it was Loki that fashioned a dagger that could kill one of the other gods. It might have been Baldur. I think Baldur springs to mind because he couldn't be killed. The only way he could be killed was to be stabbed by mistletoe. Now, if you know how mistletoe grows, it's almost impossible to get any wood out of mistletoe. But somehow he managed to fashion this weapon out of mistletoe, and that was used for death. So that's a slightly different view again. You know what? People are going to sort of pile in now, and they're all going to go, "Well, it wasn't Baldur, and it wasn't Loki. It was," I wasn't quite ready for Viking mythology, but mistletoe features in all of those mythologies. It's European. It's European wide.
I love this. I loved it. I've loved this conversation on how you've related a lot of these. I would say, yeah, burning questions that I've had in my mind, because as I evolve on my journey and Christmas comes every year, I'm like, every time it's just sort of a reminder of, well, why is this going on?
Why do we do this? Why do we do that? What's that all about? Yeah.
One thing I've noticed from everything you've been saying, it's like Christmas. Although like we celebrated today, I'm going to do a bit of a cheesy summary, I think, here.
Go on, yeah.
Although we celebrate today by bringing everyone together, Christmas itself is a load of ideas from the ancients, from traditions 100 years ago, all brought together today is something we celebrate together with our family.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's right.
Well, yeah, he's bob on. The only bit you missed there was the date, and the date's consistent right across the board. Everybody does it at the same time. So yeah, totally with you on that one.
As we're coming to the close now, I did have a question which I wanted to ask at the end, and so we've gone over Christmas and we've talked about sort of modern day Christmas. How do you see Christmas in the future? How do you see, what are your theories around how it will change, evolve? What will we be seeing in 10 years, 25 years time?
Wow.
It's
it's already kind of going in the direction where it might end up being one of the few occasions where as human beings we actually meet. Because I mean, what we're doing now, this Zoom is the shape of things to come. The idea that we don't have that kind of physical contact. So I think that will become more of a priority. I already said, I think the idea of gifts, the idea of spending money, I think people are going to make that count. It's going to count more in the future. So you may get less gifts of greater value, but of far more use than you previously would do. Instead of the usual Lynx box set because somebody got at you and they think you smell. It's not that kind of. You'll get more quality out of it. In terms of practicalities, you're going to get more people using the online services, probably more people using television. The Christmas trees are clearly going digital. You can buy a real looking Christmas tree now with the lights already on. So I think we're going to see technology creeping in. I think what you hang on your Christmas tree. People need to break away a bit and get original and do more things that are personal to them, which you actually see happening. I mean, pagan style Christmas trees, witchcraft, Druid, Viking, Norse, whatever tradition, they're going bonkers. You can get some really amazing Christmas trees now in those traditions. So why not do it the other thing? Why not have a Jewish Christmas tree or a Catholic Christmas tree or an Islamic Christmas tree or whatever? Why not? Why not just make the tree the focal point? Because that is something, like I said, the Egyptians had the Djed column. So you can argue that one back thousands of years. So I think in the future, these focuses, the focal points will gel. They'll become, more meaningful to more people. And diversity. I mean, it's going to be all about diversity at the end of the day. You know, Christmas is literally what you make it. If the history of Christmas has shown us anything, that's what it's shown us. There's been a Christmas probably for every decade since it began thousands of years ago. You know, from the day Jesus, you know, was carried out of his manger and carried out of that stable 2,000 years ago. From that day on, it's been unique. It's been kept in so many different ways, in so many different places. I have to say, I do not have a problem with Christmas. I think Christmas is fab.
I find it interesting how you say it might be the only time we actually meet each other. Because I work virtually, so I just work from home. And the only time I ever met my team is on Christmas time. That's the only time I meet them.
Oh, there you go.
So I mean,
yeah, it's already happening. That is the future. That's where it's going. You know, I mean, Times Square on New Year's Eve is the big American thing where you have thousands of people all getting together for the countdown and all that. I think Christmas should have a similar feel here. You know, I think we should all get together out on the streets and go and, you know, sing hymns or whatever we want to do around the Christmas tree and get together, you know, make it that together thing. Because it's one of the few opportunities when we can, you know.
No, that's great because yeah, it's good to. It's actually quite warming to think Christmas is only going to evolve for the better because it's one of the sort of as we all of us have talked about the whole way through. It's about grouping and it's about meaningful connection.
Yeah,
a lot of it, and it's one of them things that as we evolve and as we detach from each other more and more as we are with the digital age.
Yeah.
Christmas is always going to be that one significant thing to keep us together.
As an archaeologist, I'll just throw a story in, and people will know this. I think it was 1918 in the trenches, Germans versus Brits, and it was Christmas, and they could hear the Germans in the trenches singing, and the Brits were in their trenches singing. So the war was over for them for that moment, and they came out and they had a football match. Germany versus Britain. I'm pretty sure the Germans must have won that because the Brits are rubbish. But I don't follow football, but we keep losing stuff. And they came out the trenches. They had a game of football, and then they drifted back to the trenches and just went back to war again. But that is a summary. That is a historical summary of the power of Christmas. That Christmas, for that moment in those trenches, brought a war to a stop. You know, it brought war to a standstill. And that is a powerful, very powerful story from history. So that's where it needs to go. That's where the future needs to be. You know, take lessons from history. As Winston Churchill said, the further you look back, the further ahead you can see.
That's great. That's a great way to end
message.
There you go.
Really good message. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for coming on. Thank you to Brandon for connecting us.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. I could go ho, ho, ho because I've got the beard for it, can't I?
Okay. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for having me.